I fully intended to go to the University of Illinois, that is. Yeah, so Dad and I drove to Champaign-Urbana, and we saw the signs on the lawns of those who were accepting students for roomers. We stopped at this one house, a kind of bungalow that advertised, and knocked at the door, and this pleasant-looking woman said, yes. She was taking in students, and Dad asked a few questions and asked what the rental was, and she said it was $15 a month, which was the going rate, and I was quite ready to find a room for myself there. I carried in my suitcase, and as I was going back to the car for something else, she said, "Oh, incidentally, are you Jewish?" And I turned and said, "Yes. Why do you ask?" She says, "Well, it makes little difference to me, but the boys who live here may object, and I really can't afford to lose their rental fees." So Dad said, "I see." And we turned and walked away, and Dad appeared to be flushed, but said nothing. And we went to another home that advertised for student rentals, and the woman there was quite pleasant, and there was no rebuff there, and I was quite happy to be taken in. So I spent perhaps a year there in that home. It was quite pleasant, and the rental was the same. I shared a space with one or two fellows who were quite nice. And the year at the university went quite well. The classes were not too difficult. Mother accepted my monthly laundry, which was forwarded in a cardboard box with a cloth binding, and she would send back the laundered clothing, which I received in about a week later. And this was the practice among the students. And in the returned laundry, there would be a salami or home-baked cake or cookies or some other goodies. And I spent the next year with two fellows with whom I graduated high school. One was studying engineering, and the other was pre-law. And we got along quite well, and we maintained our friendship for many years. One day was December 7th, 1941. I got a call from a fellow waiter. I should have prefaced my remarks by saying that I became a waiter in a fraternity house where my cousin was chancellor. He was about 4 years my senior, and we were quite happy with that arrangement, because the the greatest expense of living downstate at the university was, of course, the meals. And as payment for being a waiter, we got our meals free. A friend of mine who was a waiter, Bert Heda, called and said on this eventful evening, he said, Al, the Japs have attacked us, our ships at Pearl Harbor. I said, where the hell is Pearl Harbor? He said, in Hawaii. He said, it was awful. He said, you'd better get ready to go to war. Well, of course, I learned about Pearl Harbor immediately, and the terrible death toll that occurred to the sailors. There was an event that I shall always remember. In the fraternity, the head waiter had graduated. Bill Snyder was his name. And the chef, and he agreed that I would be the head waiter from that point on. So I must have been in my second or possibly third year downstate. And one of the waiters, a rather small fellow by the name of Arnie Ostwald, as I recall, was a Holocaust survivor. And Arnie had a strange attitude, kind of a superior attitude. He was a German refugee, and he would come in late quite often. And one day we were under stress. We were, I think, serving dinner to guests, possibly a sorority. And he came in late, and I said, and I was out of sorts, and I said, Arnie, why the hell do you always come in late? We need your services on time. And I suppose I was unpleasant. And he looked up at me and said, you know, you're like a damn Nazi. And I must have lost it. And I slapped him across the face. And he turned red and turned around, walked away, and never returned. And it was something that had bothered me, I think, for most of my life, that I lost it and turned my wrath on this creature who had his own problems. But be that as it may, another event which was humorous, you know, in retrospect. The chef was a big black fellow who spoke in guttural terms and usually monosyllabic. When we lingered in the kitchen, he'd say, "Get your ass out of here." But we were entertaining, or the fraternity boys were entertaining, a group of sorority girls one evening, which meant that the fraternity had to borrow wine glasses and certain silverware pieces, and we were advised on how to serve properly, how to pour wine, you know, without accident, without spilling. And so these girls came in their lovely gowns, and the men were dressed in formal wear tuxedos. The light was provided by candles, and we had crisp white jackets, and we tried to be unobtrusive as we served. My cousin, the chancellor, sat at the head table, and I assigned myself to take care of the table. And I recall he lifted a butter dish to me without looking at me, as though to say, refill, replenish. And I thought, hey, you're my cousin, you can look at me, you can talk to me. But he didn't. This was kind of formal. That's how formal the affair was. Anyway, we poured wine, and the meal was served without incident. One of the waiters, Bert, had taken the wine glasses on a large tray, and some of the glasses the women drank much more delicately than the men, and they would leave half a glass of wine, and he'd get past the swinging doors into the kitchen, and he would gulp the remaining wine in the glass. Well, this went on for several times, and by about the fifth time, he was sloshed, but that didn't stop him. And when at last the women left, and Bert had a tray full of glasses, the borrowed glasses among the fraternity's own, he said, "Gentlemen, I'm going to show you the greatest astronomical feat in all the world. I will turn this tray with glasses around and come back up and never lose a glass or a drop of wine." And before I could say, "Bert, don't," he started, and crash! The glasses went against the wall. Most of them broke. And Bert unsteadily looked at the mess and said, "Oh my." And the chef came roaring out of the kitchen with a cleaver and said, "What the hell did you do?" And Bert said, "Andy," he's morose. He says, "I'm so terribly sorry." And Andy looked at him and said, "Bert, get your ass out of here." And that was an incident that I never forgotten. When I tell it to my daughters, they want to hear it again and again. And Bert and I became lifelong friends until he passed away. And I got my notice. I was told I had to report for duty. I was stationed at Camp Crowder in Missouri, which was near Neosho. And I had fallen in love with this beautiful, intelligent, wonderful girl while I was in high school, and while she was at Teachers College in Chicago, and I downstate, we communicated frequently by letter. And when I was stationed at Camp Crowder, she came to visit, and it was with the understanding that we would marry. When she came, and we did, we saw the justice of the peace, and he married us, and we had several days together before I had to return to camp. We had an apartment, not an apartment, but a room in one of the homes, and as we sat on the evening of our marriage, we sat on a swing, and I must have leaned over and kissed her, and the woman of the house rapped at the window and said she didn't approve of that type of behavior. I implored her that we were married and that this was quite legal, whether she didn't believe me or whether she chose not to. Anyway, Lorraine left, and I reported to another camp in Texas. Sometime there I was assigned to a medical group since I had some biology training, and we learned how to give injections and learned how to bandage mannequins' presumed injuries. And then a group of us were assigned to the South, or rather to the Pacific Theater, and a group to the European Theater of Operations. And at that time, the war was really going at a hellish rate. There were terrible casualties on both fronts. Military train had taken us to California, Wilmington, I believe, and we boarded a ship, the SS Sumter, and we were in dry dock for a while, or dock, and the meal that was served that evening was a pork stew, and it was edible. It wasn't bad. I think we hadn't eaten for a number of hours, and so that most anything would have been acceptable. But anyway, after having eaten in the mess, I went up to the deck and looked at the ocean, as I hadn't seen it before, and it looked peaceful. Then the ship weighed anchor and moved slowly beyond the breakers, and suddenly something went terribly wrong. The bow of the ship turned up and then down, and with it my stomach. And oh my God, I'm going to lose my dinner. So I made way to go to my bunk down below, and on the way I vomited over some poor guy's new issue trousers and shoes, and I think he would have killed me if he could, but I didn't wait for his response. I just ran to my cot, vomited into my helmet, and lay there, I think, for about 2 days, until my stomach, I think, submitted to the motion of the ship. And it seemed to me that there was little wonder that I got sick. I looked at the fowl, I don't know what they were, chickens or turkeys or whatever, and they were hanging, and they were blue in color. Anyway, we were on the high seas, if that's what they're called, and by that time, the movement of the ship and the water no longer affected me. I had, I suppose, what is called my sea legs, and I became friendly with a number of fellows on board. There came a notice that an atomic bomb had been dropped on a large city in Japan, Hiroshima, and that it had caused terrible devastation. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people had perished, and the town's homes had been blown apart, and this was received by the men on board with awe and jubilation, and I suppose with some sorrow, but very little, because with that, we thought the war was effectively over and we would be going home. The rumor had it that maybe 2 out of every 5 GIs would be killed when we landed in Japan, because that was our destination. And we waited, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 days, and nothing had happened. There was no news of a ceasefire from the Japanese until the bomb had been, a second atomic bomb had been dropped. We knew then that the Japanese couldn't possibly last, and it was true that the Japanese had surrendered. The ship landed at a port, Wakayama, and we were let off the ducks. That was the name given to these specialized troop carriers who went as far as they could toward the shore. But the water, as we landed, the water was up to our waists, and we had 90-pound back sacks. Rumor had it that 1 or 2 of the soldiers had drowned, and that may be. When we got close to the shore, we saw that the Japanese gun emplacements were really young tree trunks made to look like weaponry from a distance. And the Japanese were quite submissive. They gave us no trouble. But wading into the water, and after having been awake for the last 24 or more hours, I, like many other GIs, was dead tired. I found some crates and climbed up upon them with my carbine at my side and fell asleep for I don't know how long, maybe an hour or 2. And finally I was awakened, and we regrouped and walked to a chemical plant not far from the beach that had been partially bombed out. The Marines had landed in Wakayama the day before we got there. The Marines had destroyed some valuable material in the laboratories. Not that it would have made any difference to most of the GIs, but I remember using that equipment at the university, and it was costly, but it was needless destruction. I was transferred along with my group to a standing building, the only one in Osaka, a distance of I don't know how many miles from the shore, but it was a building with structural firmness that had survived among a city of rubble. And there we set up a clinic where we would give injections and care for minor, so-called minor injuries that the GIs incurred. Our commanding officer there was a Captain Tabor, fine man, who said that our rank really should be greater because our responsibilities were, and we were handling many GIs. He said, I'm going to make you fellows T3s, which was a specialized type of ranking that meant 3 stripes up and 1 stripe down, or 1 rocker. By that time I had become friendly with another GI, Banks Carr, who was a pharmacist. At that time, a pharmacist did not have a special or officer rating. We were in charge of this clinic. We were what the GIs would call chancre mechanics. Chancre being a lesion that occurred as a result of a venereal disease. And venereal disease became rampant among the GIs. There was a great deal of fornication going on, the GIs, with the population of evening girls or girls who practiced their so-called profession. And I became an expert on identifying gonorrhea involvement or syphilitic chancres. And this went on for quite some time until we got to a larger hospital. By that time, many of the GIs had been discharged because they had the orders came down from Washington that men with a certain amount of service could be discharged. So the older fellows in the outfit had gone home, leaving us in a commanding position, or as much as an NCO or non-commissioned officer would be in charge. We moved to a large school, and the school had been abandoned, of course. It was a U-shaped building. The commanding officer there was either a lieutenant colonel or a major, I don't recall, but he was a fine surgeon, and he needed a plan for this building so that he could place beds in certain areas and set up a surgical theater in another area. So he said, is there anyone here who can draw up a plan for these buildings? I volunteered. I was given a tape measure and a pad of paper and a pencil. This is something that, of course, I never did before, but I was happy to volunteer. I did so, and the colonel was pleased. He knew that I was interested in what he was doing as a surgeon, so he allowed me to witness a surgical procedure. I don't know what it was, not that it's important now. But anyway, I got dressed up in the sterile gown and gloves and hat. And as I came into the surgical theater, I must have touched something, and he had a fit. He said, "You've just contaminated the surgical armamentarium. Now get out and redress." And so I did something that I would never forget. And I watched him, and he worked with such deftness and surety. I thought, God, this is the kind of work that I want to do one day. I had finally accumulated enough points to be discharged when I fell ill. Now, I fell ill, but I turned yellow. So I was diagnosed with jaundice, and I had to remain in the hospital for a couple or 3 weeks until my blood tests were normal. But it was those 2 or 3 weeks which saved me from a great deal of grief later. It gave me extra points of service. A year or 2 later, when some of my friends were called back into service, I had enough points to have kept me out, and I was grateful for that. So I was discharged and re-met my wife, and things went swimmingly for a short while. And I applied to medical school, and the registrar looked at my record, and it was favorable. He said, "Unfortunately, the next class is full, so you'll have a year to wait." He said, "In the meantime, in that year of waiting, why don't you go back to school, back to the university, take some courses, and you'll be even better qualified for the next class." He said, "I'd go downstate to Champaign-Urbana." I said, no, I won't. Because I'm not going to leave the city. I can't afford to live there. My wife is here. She's working as a teacher. I'll go to school in Chicago, but I won't go downstate. And the registrar, who was sort of a mellow sort of guy, he was avuncular, kind of your favorite uncle type guy, he said, "That will be permissible." So I went to this new college in downtown Chicago. It was called Roosevelt College. And there was an auditorium that was an architectural masterpiece when it was built in the early 20th century by famous architects. Anyway, I worked diligently and got 30 hours of straight A in science subjects. So at the end of the year, I presented my course book and told the registrar at medical school that I was ready to register for the next class, medical school class. And suddenly, this kindly guy took on the aspect of an unfriendly type of demon. He pursed his lips and said, "You know, there are those who have done well and who really deserve." And I said, "Wait a minute, I've done everything you told me to do, and I've made sacrifices." Well, he wasn't about to hear my story, and he turned his back. I thought, my God, you know, this is the end of everything. I told my dad what had occurred. My dad, who was a grocer, and who had been selling a brand of dairy products, and he knew the president of the company. The president of the company also happened to be on the board of regents of the university. Dad explained everything to him, and a week or two later, I got my admission notice. Dad told me later that when he heard of the case, he said, "This is ridiculous." So I thought maybe this kindly registrar was maybe on the take. I don't know. I don't know what happened, but I thought I was qualified. And the first year of medical school was no walk in the park. It was difficult. I managed to get through. And the second year wasn't much better, but the third year was much better, much easier. And the fourth year was a breeze. And so I was happy to have reached the point of graduation, and I'm sure my folks were proud, but they were never the type of people who wore their hearts on their sleeve. I've graduated medical school. My wife was quite pregnant. Well, she was teaching all the while. Yeah, Lorraine was teaching, and until I don't know what month. But the graduation took place at Navy Pier in Chicago, and the governor, Adlai Stevenson, gave the address, the graduating address. And I said my folks were not emotionally involved or did not show great emotion. They were quite pleased, I know. Dad, who was a disciplinarian when I was growing up, he had good reason, but like my older brother said years later, he would have faced some legal battles, punished the boys fiercely. But he became almost affectionate as he got older, and he was a concerned father. He loved his children. I know that.